Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Kowalczyk. I'm the founder CEO of ChemicalQDevice, here to talk about the multimodal neuroimaging and QML for Alzheimer's. Now, the big thing to take away from this cover slide is basically you want these to be wide and narrow as far as, so this is time. So typically MEG, EEGs, these are the more simple ones, better at the low end with milliseconds. And then also, I think this is resolution on the left-hand side, so narrower like an EEG or MEG. So there's a lot to consider as far as recent Alzheimer's breakthroughs. So the ones that you'll hear most often these days is blood plasma and cerebral spinal fluid, CSF. And in specific, you have for blood plasma, it's to get early Alzheimer's disease tests for the masses, right? So at first glance, this might look like, oh, what's going to happen to the other methods? When in reality, it might actually increase the number of tests. And you can see here, so I'm looking under blood plasma right now. So patients that require further confirmatory testing require PET scan and or CSF. So it's basically to help the whole industry out. There's many people that can't afford, say, for instance, an initial PET scan with insurance. There's time issues too, and just, blood is convenient, blood plasma. There's hundreds of components in blood. So when you're talking about quantum, and I'm going to show basically a big quantum map at the end here, is you're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of components, depending on how you count them. Now, Roche also does development for drugs. Their most recent one, I don't think went over too well. I think it was last quarter, 2022. And then they also do QML, or quantum machine medical imaging. So this just shows that it's not just one thing. It's not just blood plasma or CSF or even neuroimaging. So with cerebral spinal fluid, this is the other kind of breakthrough last year. They say a likely positive result is consistent with a positive amyloid PET, but does not establish a diagnosis. It's not a standalone test. It must be tested with users, and this phrase is kind of a little tricky, of the subject device blinded to the disease status and PET scan results of the subject. So I think this is kind of like the user can't the other results quite yet. And then here you're talking 200 times less protein content than in blood, so potential, for quantum sensing right there. Now, neuroimaging, so basically it rules out hemorrhages. A structural MRI test will tell you if you have brain tumors, strokes versus Alzheimer's. And in a lot of cases, I kind of see that they'll still be ordered, like in many other cases, how it is today. It's the standard. And you could get function, like a functional fMRI. You can get structural, which is the sMRI. And it can distinguish between types of degenerative brain diseases. 90% of all healthcare data is medical imaging, with neurology being number one. Now, the quantum effect, and you'll start to see quantum machine learning across all these things, is basically taking parts of the code and instead of running on conventional computers, you run them on a quantum computer, quantum simulator. So with the brain, not only are you talking 100 billion neurons, for imaging of what the things that can pick up, 100 billion glial cells as they're interacting. And that leads to the whole notion of people want to simulate a brain inside of a computer. And in that case, we may need some more power. There's things you can do as far as reducing circuit sizes or reducing quantum programs to run on smaller quantum computers. So looking forward to the business model with all this, so licensing, subscriptions, and partnerships. And this is basically, the first one is still predicting with quantum machine learning in Alzheimer's disease. And you can see that a lot of it depends on the blood test or the CSF test, but as part of that process, having that to turn prospects into customers into promoters, and then mainly associate with partners that do good and well. Now, the big competitive with this is basically the hypothesis is that many neuroimaging, neuroradiology partners will struggle to implement quantum machine learning into current or new services. There's technicalities, and there's some parts are easier and some parts it's a learning curve. If you go to program something, run a circuit on a quantum computer, and many people can get that as far as that, but actually, diagnosing it and improving your circuit or your program. The strategy is to establish the overall value of business. Now, how can ChemicalQDevice add to other partners' resources or capabilities to give them a competitive advantage? And this comes with the conversion of existing medical machine learning pending approvals, quantum computing sensing technologies expertise, also being a pioneer in quantum machine learning and medical with corresponding medical networks. So the main players with this are going to be medical experts and your programmers. So in all these things, so you have algorithms, clinical approvals, how exactly do you run on a quantum simulator today? Do you wait for a better quantum computer? Are the results going to hold up in 5 years? These are the types of things that you have to consider going into quantum and medical. So I'm going to do just that. So I'm going to start off with quantum AI and try to make more sense of it, because you'll see these terms and a lot of people that aren't very strong in machine learning, deep learning, may not be able to follow when you see QNN versus the QCNN. And I'm going to go over some history. So medical imaging, AI in medicine, also this multimodal AR or multimodal for Alzheimer's disease. And then here's a decent outline. So at the top, you don't hear this term as much as, say, quantum machine learning, but quantum artificial intelligence. Here they say the use of quantum computing for the computation of machine learning algorithms. Now, quantum machine learning is a catch-all term. You'll hear it, and it's most common in many publications, Nature, and it's the integration of quantum algorithms with machine learning programs. So in most of these hybrids, figure CPU, GPU, and now you have a QPU. So there's different types of simulation disciplines. So a lot of the simulation we're not quite seeing yet, especially like in Nature. And so you see quantum neural networks. So I'll show you a little bit diagram after this. This is basically machine learning model or algorithm that combines concepts from quantum computing and artificial neural networks. And when you hear of something as deep, so a deep neural network or deep learning has greater than 3 layers. Sometimes people include the 3. So that's the term. And anything less than that is considered shallow. Now, quantum convolutional neural networks, convolutional means merging. So basically, a good explanation is a quantum circuit-based algorithm inspired by convolutional neural networks, a highly effective model in machine learning. So I think the term that's going around now is quanvolutional, meaning quantum convolutional, to kind of cut down into one word. And it's good for imaging. So convolutional neural networks are kind of like the standard for imaging. And it's to overcome large data model problems, in the specific areas. So quantum hardware improvements may yield additional. So the way people program with quantum software is you're kind of trying to use things like a quantum convolutional neural network that does relatively well with today's noise. So just as it is today with just machine learning being in many of the big industries out there, is you'll start to see, more and more of those, specifics of not only QCNNs and likely more specific than that. Now, as far as it breaks down with machine learning, so you have an input, so this is brain image, feature extraction done by user, classification, and it still gives you the output of yes or no. So it just depends on the case of which one you want to use. And in deep learning, more automated. So you see more layers here. Actually, the feature extraction and classification are together to get, and this is called, say, for instance, in Alzheimer's disease classification, demented or non-demented. Now, this is a quantum convolutional neural network. So I'll start with the quantum aspect. It has 10 qubits, so Q0 through Q9. Convolutional, so they don't include pooling in the term, but a layer is a single convolutional plus pooling, single convolutional plus pooling to get fully connected. So the whole thing with everything is based on everybody wants better quantum computing or better quantum computers. And it just takes time to get awesome results. But keep in mind, a lot of these programs that you see are based off of the notion that they do well with today's noisy intermediate scale quantum computers. Now, this first article here is basically medical imaging. And a lot of these stories are actually quite interesting, if not amusing, leading up to winning Nobel Prizes. So the first example you may have seen, I'll show you in the next slide, is William Röntgen discovers the X-ray with a cathode ray tube. Now, cathode ray tubes were used in, we don't see them too much anymore, CRT television. And he took the image of his wife's hand, Bertha. I'll show you the image next. Now, a year later, and at the time, this is a huge thing, so figure 1896, 1,000 plus scientific articles regarding X-ray. And then he's rewarded the Nobel Prize, you see some years later, it was like 5-6 years later, in physics. The military used X-rays to evaluate World War II injuries. Nobel Prize winning Marie Curie, you'll hear a lot about her in chemistry. She actually drove a vehicle with an X-ray machine to the battlefront in France. So the history here is amazing. So I'll open it up after I get through all this, as first questions. And here's the image. So obviously you've heard the same thing. They started putting these X-ray machines into shoe stores, and then people would get too much X-ray radiation. So it's the category after UV, or ultraviolet radiation. But this is historic for seeing inside the person as an image for the first time, and that's her wedding ring. And there's some side stories with that too, if you want to get into it. So now these 2D flat X-rays transformed into 3D imaging, and now 4D imaging is a 3D image plus time considered. And then early 1900s, this Alessandro Villabona, conventional tomography, so this isn't CT, this isn't computed yet, simultaneously moving X-ray source and detector. So if you've ever done CT research and gantry and the moving parts, this is kind of like the fundamentals behind that, using X-ray radiation. Now, in 1967, Sir Godfrey Hounsfield invents computed tomography. So this is the CT that we know. And there's been many advancements ever since then, but the first CT patient scan, 1971. So again, where if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum and you start to the right, they can flip it sometimes, or they can, however you want to look at it. But red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet is visible. And then you have ultraviolet, and then you have X-ray. The early 1980s, over 3 million CT studies performed. 2018, over 100 million CT annual studies. And I think the trend keeps going up, and they'll try to optimize the radiation, and they'll put a statistic on it, like this is equivalent to some other thing that you would just normally experience anyway. Now, the advancements are scan speed, smaller slices, decreased radiation dose, and better image quality in a fraction of a second. So X-ray is going to be faster than your MRIs typically, and it's higher radiation, but it's better for bone than it is, say, for tissue. Now, in MRIs, so this is radio waves. So MRIs are low energy and they're slow. You typically have to do a certain number of scans, maybe 30, 45 minutes. Many people with claustrophobia can't handle it because there's like clunking sounds, but it does tend to get the best spatial resolution, meaning like image quality over any other technique. So here's where the quantum comes into it, because technically an MRI is a quantum sensor. So Felix Bloch and Edward Purcell, NMR I've used many, many times in the laboratory. So these are for liquid samples and not humans. And then you'll see all this stuff going into patient use. So in 1952, they're jointly awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. 1973, Paul Lauterbur published the first NMR image. 2003, Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine. So by that point, 2000, having MRIs with patients. Like I said before, it's used for soft tissues. And then here's where I'll start to get into multimodalness. I've covered multimodalness as far as using an image compare with electronic health records, compared to, blood work or cerebral spinal fluid. Well, this, and I'm going to get into it more, it's called multimodal neuroimaging. So you're taking PET plus MRI to kind of compensate, because MRI has better resolution, or like better, think of it like a pixels on a TV, better spatial resolution, and PET has other benefits. So fMRI is kind of the functional of it all, to get these certain types of central nervous system diseases. So here's an example of, so to say, magnetic resonance perfusion. You'll see a lot of these. So oftentimes red is good. So red is more activity. In PET scans, if you're doing a radio tracer, that area shines the most, that has the most glucose, and it's good. So a lot of things in science are like that, so to make it hard for somebody else to initially understand what you're doing. Now, ultrasounds is a huge area. I just researched, say, like 10, 20 of these recent FDA approvals, and GE is brand new 4D ultrasound, which is 3D in real time. And then the other approval was for the algorithm. I think the algorithm can be used by other companies, though. Inexpensive, widely available. It's basically, if you think of like how I'm talking right now, it's higher frequency than that. You can't hear it. And it bounces, reflects, and transmits and absorbs through the human body. So these newer 3D ultrasounds are less operator dependent, so more automated. And then so you have contrast enhanced US. So US is ultrasound, improves visualizations of blood vessels. So you'd be surprised the amount that you could do these days with an ultrasound. Late 1700s, so you can see this is pushed back, many years, from all the MRI and CT X-ray. So Lazzaro Spallanzani theory that bats rely on sound. So, the hearing things bounce and reflect. Obviously, there's no light in a cave per se. 1826, Jean-Daniel Colladon calculated the speed of sound in water, and it was found to be about what we believe today, so early 1800s. And then here's the Doppler effect. So Christian Doppler postulated this effect, and it's the basis for ultrasound blood flow now. Ultrasound is huge with pediatrics. It can be used with physicians right bedside. That has an enormous effect on the relationship, because as they're looking at things, you can talk to the patient. So it's not just like order a test and then somebody sits over somewhere else. So you can get a little bit more information. So you have focus ultrasound. They've done it for some neurosurgery applications, and I'm going to get into a little bit, and I've talked a little bit as far as, image-guided surgeries with these techniques. So the key is the multimodalness of it all. So 1940s, Carl Theodosic attempts to locate brain tumors with an ultrasound. 1958, gynecologist Ian Donald uses ultrasound to study unborn fetus. So this is kind of like the pediatric stuff. Ultrasound elastography for quantity measurement of tissue stiffness. It's not easy, and I'll focus on the next review here too. It's not easy always to get the quantitative measurement, meaning how much of a certain thing. And then they use ultrasound with CT or MRI to get different scans spatially co-registered. So here's an example left, grayscale ultrasound. And again, these aren't MRIs, or these aren't structural MRIs that typically have great resolution, but there's beyond just it just being an art of saying, oh, I can understand this based on my understanding of biology and what's going on in the body, that there's algorithms, like deep learning algorithms these days, to use adjacently with ultrasounds, very widely available tests. So nuclear medicine is SPECT or PET. So it's due to the mechanics of it. It's not large scales of gamma rays. I know for PET, you metabolize this substance, this radio tracer, and the positrons are emitted. 1961, James Robertson built the first single plate, what we know as the PET scan. And 1998, prototype PET CT scanner first clinically used. So a lot of times they'll try to, if you're just doing two modalities, take the advantages of one and then, advantages of the other. So say, for instance, an EEG MRI. Now, in 1927, Egas Moniz performed the first cerebral angiography, awarded the Nobel Prize in medicine for that. Now, as you can see, so left is left is, so if you see A, US color Doppler, that's ultrasound, and it's combining it with CT images, B from the right. Pretty common things that's done in medicine. Now, the one that's really interesting, 1929, Werner Forssmann, first cardiac angiography. So this is an X-ray to see blood vessels inserted sitting by himself, catheter into his own arm, vein, and passed it into his heart. This is not recommended these days. However, he did get a Nobel Prize in medicine in 1956. Now, you know, a lot of these, and especially the high tech, and if somebody shows you just data and without you knowing, say like a blood test or say like a cerebral spinal fluid, just numbers, and if you're not completely aware of what's going on, it's hard. But if somebody shows people images, that's of great use, and I think you're going to see them kind of sticking around for a while, and they kind of like lead the industry in many regards. Tissue ablation, so this is with RF, so you can do certain things with radio frequencies to make things hot and ablate those types of things. And then you also see these high intensity focus ultrasounds. MR guided focus ultrasound we saw on the slide before. So in Parkinson's, there's a tremor, and you know you could pick that up. So the MR is probably the structural, and the ultrasound is more like the functional aspect to it, or this focus ultrasound. So here's just some things that can be done and have been done. So basically, MR guided focus ultrasound. So ultrasound, you know, it shows up here. So in A, no arrow, and then in B, and then C, and C, apparently they want this specific aspect to show up in the brain. So just different ways of doing things. Now, radiologists can now remotely interpret images in real time. So, and a step further, as you've seen before, is that, you know, it's done by, say, Google software or Microsoft's or AWS's. I all had huge announcements last quarter. Computer software, hardware advances have improved the field, and this is kind of where quantum comes in. So where does it make sense to use quantum machine learning, quantum computers, quantum sensing? How long is it going to take to get, you know, regulated, those types of things. And then previously, you know, figure analog film stored, and then these days we have PAX search. So it's just, it's a lot easier to try to do, you know, not be there in person, you know, because these things are digital and online. And here's the number 4, imaging has grown faster than any other medical service. So it's just determining what makes sense, coming up with our, you know, new hardware sensing techniques in quantum to use. And then radiomics, you'll hear quite often, is complex machine learning to extract quantitative. So that's the thing. It's usually easy to see something qualitatively, but to quantitate that's a little bit more challenging. And then also future with radiologists collaborate with ML developers, such as AI or explainable AI. Now here's some, so back in the day, they called artificial intelligence in medical AIM. So AIM. I think it's Stanford mostly. And then today you'll see AIMI. So it's AIMI. As kind of like the newer one. Now, for those that, and those, you know, I see other people that are on here that have been on before. Alan Turing first describes artificial intelligence. This is, you know, Turing test is a computer capable of human intelligence. So this has been applied to many things in quantum. You know, it's a quantum machine, a true Turing machine. And again, if there's questions afterward, I'll open it up. Now, in the 50s, John McCarthy, AI of making intellectual machines, there's several limitations to medicine using it at that time, but some of these upcoming ones might surprise you. Early 2000s, they said a new digital age in medicine, and it's deep learning. So it's, you know, if it's a convolutional neural network or, you know, but basically it's having greater than-ish 3 layers. Some people consider 3. But these things can get quite elaborate, and basically improving healthcare diagnostics, accuracies, and workflow. Here's the timeline that they had. So I'm going to pick it up. So basically, there's been a couple winters. So the first winter, mid-70s and the 80s. they just, weren't sure as far as like AI and like the technical aspect. Now, the second winter was actually the hardware that was needed. So as we start to get into more and more hybrids, and either people, who've come onto this discussion before have highlighted that GPUs are doing, work in quantum too. And then, there's just going to be lots of hybridness. But you see this after the winter with deep learning. This is a huge time in 2000 because it's basically allowing you to do functional things in medicine that they couldn't do before. And some of the other highlights is basically, so you see Apple Siri, Amazon's Alexa. I'll get to they're called chatbots. And then you also see 2017, the first deep learning application in healthcare. I believe this is cardiovascular. And then, say, for instance, the last 10 I checked, 2 of them at least were deep learning. So AI may facilitate better disease and therapeutic monitoring. In the 50s to 60s, they defined it so machines that had abilities only humans previously did. So just imagine things weren't great back there as compared to today's standards. 1961, first industrial robot arm called the Unimate, used it on the assembly line at General Motors. 1964, Joseph Weisenberg's ELIZA, it's natural language processing chatbot. 1960s medical literature analysis and retrieval system, PubMed, by the National Library of Medicine. The one that's kind of a little bit amusing, 1966, Stanford Research Institute, they called it Shaky. Now, Shaky, they said, was the first electronic person. Not only did it process complex instructions, it also carried them out. And going through, so here's the 2 winters. It's the late 1970s, it's the perceived limitations of AI. So some could argue that it didn't really start as far as great applications until, the dawn of this 2000. Late 1980s to early 90s winter, it's the cost of these databases. So 1971 biomedicine application in Rutgers. So Rutgers and Stanford are the 2 big ones. So 1975 Rutgers, the first NIH-sponsored AIM, so artificial intelligence medicine. 1973 Stanford University medical experimental AI, and then they got better networking between clinical and biomed researchers. So a lot of these, the foundations or the building blocks for biotech, here in San Diego, huge thing, medtech. 1976, AI feasibility achieved in medicine. So this is glaucoma consultation using CastNet. Early 1970s backward chain AI system MYCIN. So this is patient information input by physicians with 600 rules for bacterial pathogens treatments. It advanced to MYCIN, and then MYCIN advanced to internist. And then medical knowledge aided the primary care physician in these cases. 1986, de-explained decision support system by UMass. Initially 500 diseases up to 2,400 that it could handle. Late 1990s, and this is kind of like this dawn or like the turning point. And if you're, in my generation, looking at these Best Buy computers and, so this is that era, right? Of like, what was the turning point to get deep learning? Now, 2007, a lot of people know IBM Watson won first place on Jeopardy. And then for the medical use, I don't know if it's planned like this, but 10 years later, IBM Watson for new proteins discovery, deep QA, backward reasoning with NLP. You'll hear backward reasoning a lot. I think it's synonymous with explainable or interpretable. Now, the modern NLP chatbots, 2011, Apple's Siri, 2014, Amazon's Alexa, 2015, PharmaBot to assist in medical education. So it's not like this, it's like something you can't really mess up, but it's good at as far as, patient interaction. 2017, same kind of thing, Mandy, automated patient intake process. So that's the thing, is the trend is for once better hardware is available, it opens up these software programs to run. I went over the 2017, the cardio AI that it can now do in seconds. So this is, deep learning. It's kind of interesting. It's MRIs in seconds. Usually you see like CT or X-ray. More approvals. I think these are deep learning, lung imaging, chest X-rays, head CTs, like brain scans. And 2017, Gargaya et al. Used deep learning to screen for diabetic retinopathy, and then also used for melanoma, and then Alzheimer's disease prediction. So here's basically so this is basically neuroimaging multimodalness, or multimodal neuroimaging. So the papers that they use, 450 references, 1978 to 2020, and this will give you a good idea as far as what's the combining of all of these neuro techniques to get things. Now, the issue with some of this is time. I think some of the PET MRIs you can run at the same time, but you can get potentially better temporal or spatial. So spatial resolution is like a TV, like resolution, picture quality. Temporal is time-based. Enhanced contrast, corrected image distortions, and a bridging physiological and cognitive information. So here's basically the papers that they found, and you can see where the trend is. It's up. So they did it in February 2020, and that's why the last one is short. So of all these, you hear MRI, PET, CT, SPECT, their characteristics is you try to match them, so there's a variety of factors: the hospital, availability, cost to the patient, signal sources and energy levels, like I said before, spatial temporal resolution, anatomical, structural, pathophysiology, metabolism, structural connectivity, functional connectivity, the signal to noise ratio, contrast to noise, reduced time. So you're trying to find different modalities that make sense to put to arrange together. So, and this is basically in the cases for a disease, disorder, or lesion that manifests itself in different forms. So sometimes when you get an initial scan, it isn't always what they think it is. So it's same thing. I mean, today's the blood work and the CSF that we're likely going to have as, these pre-screens, and then, have to go on further to neuroimaging, is that you never want to rely on just one test. And even images can be deceiving too. So it's just compiling this information. So this is basically what they were looking at in this review. So you look at degenerative brains, Alzheimer's, MCI, Parkinson's are big ones. And then the types of, so you have multimodal. I'll go over an image with multi-focus, multi-temporal, multi-view, and then atlas-based segmentation. This multi-atlas has been a big thing to, solve some of the problems with the neuroradiologist. And here's some of the pros and cons. I'm going to go over some of this stuff in the embedded text up ahead. But basically, some of these are pretty well known. CT, high specificity, both functional and metabolic information, but it cannot do soft tissues, and likewise, MRI is better at that. But it's a good overview. Optical imaging, PET and SPECT, I was a little bit less familiar with. Now, fMRI reaches highest range of spatial resolution, so meaning it's the best image quality, and this, I think, at the time of writing around 2020. Now, EEG and MEG, the very first slide that I showed you, can be millisecond. fMRI signals can be considered proportional to neuron activity, and I don't think that that's quite quantitative. So that's where, magnetic resonance fingerprinting is basically this quantization imaging. So you can tell how much of things. Microsoft has been behind this, and they've been trying to link it up with quantum computing. It in itself, and so does MRIs. You'll hear this block equation, which is related to quantum. So these are two different MRIs. So T1, and without getting into too much of the detail, you could watch all these videos of the differences in physics between these and pulse sequences and that kind of stuff. But it's the same brain, and you can see that it's picking up different information. So during developing brains, MRI standard for pediatrics, MRF gives you additional brain tissue properties. PET and SPECT for blood perfusion, metabolism, and then they're not quite as high as resolution, and they can't do 3D. So I don't think there's ever been a 3D PET, for instance. But so the PET MRI can do prediction, characterization, and classification. It's a good balance between them. So PET requires an injection of the patient, and the MRI And I think they're both similar as far as like the magnetic setups. It's just what's going on with the body with PET, and there's basically it's radio labeled. And then here's some of the MRF in action. So you see digital phantom experiments, conventional T1, T2, MRIs, MRF on the right. And then, so basically to do anatomical, you do structural MRI. Here's a good combination, EEG, fMRI, multi-focus fusion, multi-view fusion, multi-temporal fusion, and data acquisition. Now, segmentation has been an issue, so this lies under image computing. So in medical image processing, there's image formation, which is detection and reconstruction. And then there's segmentation and visualization, further down the process. And the solution so far has been this multi-atlas segmentation for superior accuracy. Now, here's an image that's interesting. And, you see multi-focus, multi-temporal, multi-view, multimodal. Now, the fused image takes, the combined with these. And some of these techniques have been around for a while, like you'll take the inverse and then you'll add it, those types of things. But you can kind of see the fused image, how with the brain scan here, that you're getting both kind of that structural, and then that might be PET, and then they're overlaid like that for ease of use or viewing. So basically, you're talking biomarkers with PET and SPECT, and the way you get PET quantitative information is through partial volume effect. That's achieved through the ADNI database. The ADNI database is the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, but it also has a lot of other information besides just the brain images. So you'll see all these different techniques, and it's basically, the big thing with this is it's a balance, because if you have too many techniques and you're merging data, and it's like time issue, money issue, these types of things. So that's where I think the blood test is going to help for Alzheimer's. So basically, I think it's going to get a lot more people tested. Now, the people that do need it, as far as, you can't just rely on a single type of test, that it'll be sent to neuroimaging or cerebral spinal fluid. So this is for, distortion correction, and then some of these other ones I've kind of gone over before. Now, this is a specific paper. Now, MALT for AD, multimodal MRI neuroimaging for Alzheimer's disease detection based on a 3D convolutional model. So you would call this a 3D CNN, so as you can see with this. And so it automatically fuses, it's using ADNI into this BIDS standard. And they use these three different, so this is like a real research paper for a specific thing, not a review. Three classifiers: softmax, which did the best, support vector machine, and then random forest to forecast and classify. Now, the predicted AD progression combining MRIs for ADNI, Kaul, and Oasis. So this is basically, this is setting up. So you have the image that's directly from these databases, and then you get a final cropped image at the bottom there. And then one of these other studies for Alzheimer's disease classification, a binary would be MCI to AD or non-demented to AD. But anyways, this is common. Binary accuracy, 93%. It goes down to 87% with multi-class. And you can see analyzing every MRI delays detection and slows treatment. So they're trying to make the case for this, that maybe you don't have to do as many scans. So a scan is basically MRI, you have to do so many for 30 minutes or 45 minutes typically. And basically there's multimodal approaches that can help save time or money, and both. So you can see, so the CNN classification accuracy, 93%, specificity, 91, sensitivity, 95, feature fusion sensitivity, 94%. So here's kind of like the big process. So the thing that I didn't quite understand this paper, because it's ADNI, Oasis, and Kaul, is you have these, and then you're looking at MRIs, and I think they're from different patients. So that was the other thing. I don't think there's the same patient between all. I could be wrong though. And you go through this process, and here's your binary classification. So I really like this view. So this basically shows that with an MRI, you can access interior brain information. Now, some of this stuff, I think the whiter stuff is cerebral spinal fluid, cerebellum, but basically it shows, what's happening kind of like on the more technical side. Now, here's the convolutional neural network. So you get the MRI images and then convolutional plus pooling. So this has 3 layers. So some people would say this is still shallow learning. Some people would say this is deep learning because it's not over 3 total layers. You combine the convolutional and the pooling, and then flattening these other things. And the important thing is softmax did the best job compared to support vector machine or random forest. All they're classifiers, classifying as AD or non. So this is the training accuracy for softmax. So as you can see, you could, for somebody that's seen these a number of times, like, trying to make sense of it, but basically over time, that's quite typical for machine learning or deep learning. Now, they use single core i12 CPU, and these things make a world of difference. And I've seen some experiments take 10 hours, on an awesome setup. It just depends on how complex things are. So this is kind of like the nuts and the bolts of what, number one, NVIDIA is working on, and number two, what's likely going to be available to not only, researchers, but huge organizations. And, using these combination CPU, this is the GPU, and then obviously there's no QPU in this paper. So as you can see here is softmax 98%, SVM 90%, random forest 86%, and they want to do, it's called multi-class classification. So this would be, say for instance, non-demented MCI to AD. Sometimes there's additional classes in MCI. So I wanted to go over these. Basically, an Alzheimer's Association put this up. In the number of dollars that's spent on Alzheimer's disease every year, 2021, 270 billion, 2022, 320 billion, and expected to be $1 trillion nearly by 2050. It's a huge area, and there's multiple ways of going about it. So here's, for instance, a view of inside the brain. So, amyloid beta plaques, tau's, and I kind of referenced it a little bit earlier as far as like the complexity of a brain versus the blood sample is much greater. Blood samples, they can't interact with each other, but the brain, you're talking about human consciousness and so on and so forth, and the opportunity for simulation. And here's the imaging specs. So basically, a global AI medical imaging compounding annual growth rate 45% by 2027. Imaging data is 90% of all healthcare data. 5.5 billion global imaging procedures per year. I think this is Amazon that put that up. Now, in all these things, you look at the quantum potential for FDA breakthrough devices, and keep in mind, it's not just going to be, so the transition into deep learning in 2017, that approval, it's just, it's going to be a process to get a standardized, say, hardware, standardized, is it going to be ion trap? Can you use both ion trap and gate-based superconducting, those types of things? And then we'll have, we can open up discussion a little bit later on this. So in all these things, you look at what's been approved and then the potential for neuroimaging. And again, QML, the huge data that comes from blood work or cerebral spinal fluid is using machine learning, find out the parts that make sense to use with quantum. Now, this is very interesting because on the left is a 1,400 pound state-of-the-art portable MRI, $1 million to $3 million, uses an Apple iPad. Now, the biggest thing with this that I saw is the standoff distance appears to be a lot closer or shorter to the instrument than it is in a bigger MRI with a bigger magnet. So using that and everything on the right here, and I'll post these later, is basically there's movements and quantum sensing, these MRI like diamond tipped proximity sensors, this MRF scan thing that you just have to do, and I focused on this this week, a single scan for MRF instead of multiple scans for MRIs, a lot quicker, still using a huge magnet. Single molecule detection. Fermilab is building their own quantum computer and quantum sensors to get better MRI analysis. And then you see some of these benefits, this balance between striking performance and portability in future instruments. And NIST said that basically they envisioned a diamond tip probe that you could go up and use it as an MRI. That was 2009, I believe. Yeah, 2009. And then here's just some of the things. So this is all quantum sensors. So Diamond Meg's a little bit better off in the most recent studies because they were able to bring it closer to the scalp. And it's a huge deal. It's just this like thing like, could you take an MRI from outer space, right? Like the instrument's up there and then you're down here. So it's just, you know, the results they got, even though that their diamond quantum sensor was not as good a signal to noise ratio as MEG, that because it's biocompatible, you know, basically placing it close or if not on the surface of a rat's heart. This is a Nature article here on the left if you want to download that. And there's also been initiatives, you know, with brain in vitro samples. Harvard's behind a lot of this stuff with not nitrogen vacancy, but silicon vacancy. So they have a page for using silicon vacancy diamonds for the computer. This huge paper in 22, basically saying with quantum sense and quantum memory, it makes up for the faults of this 2019 Google quantum supremacy computer. And then most recently, they said it was more for networking, but 2 seconds of quantum memory. And I just see the blend between sensing and memory, and everybody wants awesome quantum computer here. And here's some of the stats that NVIDIA put. So they're fully into quantum and they're fully into medical. So I don't think they actually get their own medical data. It's more like a service. And here's stage 1, 2, 3, 4. So stage 1 is more Alzheimer's prediction. Stage 2 is better neuroimages. And, you know, basically this has to fall in line with the current strategy, likely going to blood work, these additional tests that would be needed in neuroimaging. And then here's some of the other things that's going on in imaging, FDA, and then all these abbreviations here, CDER, CDRH, and so forth. They're all imaging related. They had a workshop, so maybe a huddle. And ADNI-4, so for those that are familiar with ADNI 1, 2, and 3, this is the newest set of neuroimaging tests, 1,500 participants. And then you see number 3, all of this previous research. The reason why nobody's really heard about quantum and medical yet, even though there's Amgen, IBM, Roche, QCware, big papers, NIH, so on and so forth, is that the computers are not awesome. So that's the solution. So here's stage 2, it's a reconstruction algorithm. Stage 3 is the combination of the previous 2 stages. And then stage 4 is obviously an FDA submission pending regulatory approval from say like IEC, NEMA, or not necessarily NEMA, ISO, ASTM. And then there's some of the previous things that have been approved in kind of like the DL healthcare FDA. This is the big paper. So this is actually a binary classification using this quantum neural network. And they found 97% classification accuracy off versus their own 92%. This is a penny lane quantum simulator. And so it's not a real quantum computer, but it outperformed 2 of the KISS-KITs, two KISS-KIT, IBM KISS-KIT simulators. And this just gives you an idea that in all these things, it's not just a single, you're not just doing classical over here, quantum over here, although the hardware may look like that. It's a stack, and in this case, you know, using it for their QVC or quantum variational circuit, the penny lane quantum simulator, 4 qubits, and then some of these other things remain classical. Here's multimodalness in machine learning just in general. So you see imaging. I mostly focused on imaging with one paper, but it's incorporating a lot of things and doing it when it makes sense. Here's explainable AI, kind of that process. And then here's, I'll post these. So basically IBM, Cleveland Clinic, NYU Langone. Fermilab, as I mentioned before, brand new, quantum computers they're building and sensors for MRI analysis, and it can go in other directions too, I guess. And then some of the papers in QML, Amgen, IBM, IEEE, Roche, QCware, as you can see there. This is an awesome thing if you have the time and resources to do it. It's called Technology Readiness Levels. It's developed by NASA and DARPA in the US. And it could be it's for machine learning these days. So they call it an ML-TRL, Machine Learning Technology Readiness Levels. But my guesses are is if you went this path, FDA submission might be a little bit easier. And then again, it's really hard to do. So here's basically traditional pitch deck from last year, proposed stage 1 technologies. And, so this was from Subaya et al. And it kind of gives you an idea of what's been specifically using quantum for hyperparameters, and then either using the real quantum computer or the simulator. And in drug discovery, clinical trials, they have to do a number of neuroimages. So it's a huge thing if and when the shift towards more quantum sensing and quantum hardware goes, that there's likely going to be demands for better images on the clinical trials given some time. And here's everything that you could do as far as, so these are image formation and image computing steps for medical image processing with quantum. Mostly these are things that exist in machine learning, and then trying to find avenues of where quantum will go. I think it's going to be a huge industry. Now, competition, you'll see some familiar faces, Merative, Rigetti StrangeWorks is kind of like the new one to the block because Rigetti is quantum hardware. StrangeWorks does, both, hybrid kind of programming. And they already did, let's see, because QCware and Roche did 2 different medical studies kind of preliminarily. And then a lot of these other ones, Merative, I believe might be the only one that deals with insurance. So say for instance, Apple, their whole iOS, their watch and collecting healthcare data before you get to the doctor's office, they have the insurance figured out, which is what most people have in their pocket, or many people. They have the research organizations, they have the hospitals. But here's some of the other players. And they'll probably go to quantum, it's hard to project, but it is a learning curve. And keep in mind, the more detailed you get in med tech or biotech, the more you find out you're more likely to be partners and competitors, is what I've been told. Here's a bunch of the drug discovery companies. And then I'll show you a big slide of this towards the end here. And then basically this is if, IEEE Quantum has 9 quantum standards, and then for ISO, IEC, NEMA to take a look at. Here's, say, 10 of the most recent, I think these are July. They'll probably be coming out with a newer one. But 2 of these mention deep learning. They're AI, ML, software as medical device approvals. Most of these are 510K. Here's the requirements by some of these companies. Now, Roche does a ton in Alzheimer's. I think it's this drug here. Well, it says August 23N. But one of their AD drugs didn't do quite as well. And they're doing, they just had the blood breakthrough for FDA too. But a lot of them are kind of like they focus on a disease, especially Roche with Alzheimer's, and then they're built up around that. And then here's the breakthroughs last quarter. I think it's October, November, Google, Amazon, Nuance. And then, so you have some of the hardware vendors here, basically available to the startup and other people too. A summary of what the stages are as far as, prediction, merging technologies with better brain images, combining, and then an FDA submission, say the mission statement as well. And I went over this as basically, there are things that are available. Our working quantum computers available that can run QML for neuroimaging, yes. And then as far as having the pieces in place, not yet. Is action available to create products? Not yet. And then these are key things for anybody. Is it valuable, rare, imitatable? I still have to do more research on the imitatable, and then organized for success is, trying to get there. So this is the slide. So there's a couple of these floating around this year. I chose this. It seemed to be the best kind of laid out. So it's separated by users. on the left-hand side. And so you have Merck, OTI, Airbus, BMW, finance, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, life sciences. And the reason why I put this is just it's so far into it, and it's so many $billion invested, and it's like you can make the argument we're at a decent spot right now with the results that we've had in quantum annealing and some preliminary results in ion trap, those types of things. But it's a worldwide new computing hardware / sensing, and you see applications, multiverse, Metin AI. So they should have made this bigger, the cloud access to QPUs. AWS has like 5, Google Cloud, Azure. Software offerings, you see StrangeWorks in there. StrangeWorks has many partnerships with many people. Classic and Q Control just had a partnership. Simulators, NVIDIA, Fujitsu, QPUs, Rigetti, IBM, AWS. D-Wave is having a big event, I think coming up next week, pretty soon. You see all the ion trap, neutral atoms, silicon photonics. Another one of these kind of showed, like, as far as what's ready to go right now, ion trap by far, and then maybe superconducting and maybe photonics even further out. So there's a number of these that are kind of interesting because a lot of people spend a lot of time on them. And let's see here. So I'm going to open it up and let's see. I'd be interested to hear from you. Number one, because it still feels like the new year. And you should be able to come on. Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, first of all, Happy New Year, Kevin. It's midnight here in the UK.
Yeah. You had me surprised. I was like, it's so late. And then I remember
your presentation. Yeah,
I remembered it's 3 p.m. Pacific, not 6 this week. So.
I mean, this is sort of doable. Yeah, it was an amazing presentation. I mean, you always manage to get this whole bandwidth. I just wonder, could you talk a little bit more about your business plan? You sort of hinted at this at the end of your presentation. Have you got partners already? Have you mentioned previously that you were interested in speaking to the Alzheimer charities? So I'm just wondering where you are there, at what stage, and from a business perspective.
Yeah, I think I have it pretty locked down as an expert or pioneer in the specific field. And QML neuroimaging, and my top searchers are like Apple. I've got FDA. I've got AWS, those types, and I can somewhat influence by adding new connections. So yeah, it's just a matter because I've talked to a number of investors, and it's just getting a deal that it sounds like that it's going to warrant medical and quantum. I think that's the biggest thing. But a lot of this is a result of an investor saying we want to forecast, we want to plan, and then so I'll put these together to kind of similar to like the IBM quantum hardware map or their forecast. Try to do that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's early stages. I mean, I attended the Newton Venture thingy recently, which is sort of to help people to get an understanding of the venture capital ecosystem. And my understanding is that there are venture capitalists who would be willing to just invest in ideas. And a lot is about the team, really. So, so if you have the right people, the right connections, then it's much easier to get started. Which obviously, I mean, because you're doing these presentations, I would have thought your network is constantly growing.
Yeah, like I'll have like CEOs of the top pharma companies, and I would say what kind of resonates the most is the material or the timing, right? Because most of us are waiting for the awesome quantum computer, and a lot of times it's just like a headline that can really turn the whole industry as far as breakthrough in this specific thing. I think most people would agree we don't have a killer application at this point. And, it's just pushing to that point where it's just like some people might think they'll just see one thing, oh, blood work, and there was a cerebral spinal fluid FDA breakthroughs last year, and that's it. When in reality, if you read all the FDA announcements, the approval letters they send to the companies, is that that's only the starting step. And if somebody does have something, they have to go on to say neuroimaging, those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, you can be kind of agnostic when it comes to the quantum platform, because whether you use Penny Lane or IBM, I think because they're all cloud-based or Amazon, I think it's quite easy when once you have the software to run it on different systems and to compare. So you're not really bound by the hardware, because what's important for you is where you get your images, because probably, as you previously explained, you would use existing databases of images, and then you use existing algorithms, which you might want to sort of fine-tune a bit. And I like your idea of the convolutional architecture, because obviously you need compression. Images are very large, and it's a kind of question, how do you compress the information, basically. But I think you don't have to worry too much about the underlying hardware at this stage.
Yeah, and I would say most. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's more about the workflow. I mean, which in principle it's everything there. I mean, looking at your presentation, you've got the ideas, you know what you want to do. So it's a case of just sort of having like a prototype. I mean, even the algorithms are there as well. There's nothing new to it. So as you said, you might have, I don't know if there's any patents that govern those algorithms, or they're freely available. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Seth Lloyd, so MIT, he had a paper, and it said he's been working on image processing for a while with quantum. I think he had QML algorithms in this area like 2014. And then this one, the most recent one, I think it was 2000. So I think there's just so much pent up as far as like the algorithms and, the research behind it, because many people could have gotten places, I would say even 2 years ago in quantum, because if that's 21, quantum supremacy is 2019, 2 years to figure that out. It's just at that point still, the hardware was not much better. But I will highlight, so the Harvard work, with the silicon vacancy diamonds, is that the Google, Caltech, Harvard paper on its own mentioned that by using quantum sensing, quantum memory, they were able to make noise not the principal component, as opposed to the quantum effect of, storing information with the memory. So, and that's using, and they keep doing studies on the original 2019 Google quantum computer, that's well known as just error. There's lots of error. And it might be just as a proving ground, but I would say last quarter, there's so many companies that we still haven't heard from yet. And we'll hear some, I think, from D-Wave in the coming weeks, but there's just multitudes of companies that are waiting for that right time. And with NSF, so National Science Foundation, they say practical quantum computer this year. And how could you not get excited? But I think when it hits, a lot of people will be ready, and especially with the two that seem to be bigger, with ion trap and superconducting. And, there's not a lot else that's really holding too much back as far as the quantum computer. That's what everybody talks about is, the software and algorithms we've been working on for years. And I think the first QML algorithm, maybe early 90s, like the whole QC, QQ, CQ, CC.
It's very similar. It's very similar to machine learning. If you think about it, the algorithms have been around for a very long time, from 90s, 80s, even earlier. But it was the hardware that was required. And then obviously big data. Big data we've got now, what we haven't got is obviously the hardware that shows the quantum advantage. I mean,
Right.
I think there's some papers already showing a slight advantage, but it's sort of not yet cutting edge. And we also don't know how they scale up, basically, because obviously noise is still a problem. And if you scale up, noise becomes more and more of a problem.
Yeah.
So
And then
that's a big issue.
I'm going to open it up to other people too. So basically the thing that I didn't quite mention this time is the dynamic circuits, the circuit cutting, because I was thinking about putting, because the traditional thought with simulation, like my second slide, brain simulation, is that you have to have, you know, millions of qubits. And I think that might be coming to an end. Now, I know that when you run them on separate quantum computers, that you lose some of the effect. You actually lose the quantum effect, but you say, for instance, in this 100 qubit circuit, you're doing 3 at this place that's doing it, well. And then, like this, the IBM 16,000 modular quantum computer by the end of this year is going to be like that. It's not going to be 16,000 qubits. It's going to be a bunch fit together. As far as I know, like for them, say for instance, Huron, their processor this year will be lower in noise, but it's not the 433 qubits of the Osprey. So, but yeah, anybody else, any other questions? So we talked, go ahead, Ron.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, Dr. Rod. Good to see you again. I noticed you were talking about your stage 1 and demonstrating some proficiency at building QML models to do accurate predictions. And at the same time, I'm seeing through your presentations over the weeks the cacophony of regulatory agencies, and I know we've talked about this in the past also. Sets of standard images that are open source or free to use, so to speak. But then I'm starting to wonder if you're going to pursue supervised learning, for example. Do these images that are out there in the world, which are established as standard starting sets and with labels, are these under the jurisdiction of being approved by a regulatory agency, making sure that the labels are correct for supervised learning?
I mean, I think a lot of it is going to, so the leader right now in quantum standards is IEEE. They have 9, and that's, hardware, software, and networking, and everywhere in between. So the ones, say for instance, like FDA doesn't, I don't think, get into the specifics of hardware. I don't think that they'll be aware of it, but it's more of like an IEC that I see a lot, ASTM. I think ISO does a lot of machine learning, kind of like the deep learning kind of stuff too. So yeah, I don't think it'll be quite as bad. I came across a gentleman, and he used to work at IEC, and then now he has his own quantum startup. So, I mean, that's some data there. And there'll be little things, but I kind of see it start to narrow down. I'm not quite sure if there's room for more than 3 hardware manufacturers in all of it, just for a variety of reasons due to complexities.
Well, I'm more focused on the training data. I mean, you have to acquire training data. At some point, you probably have to be able to demonstrate your proficiency with making QML predictions, right? So, but my concern is this training data going to be subject to regulatory inspection as far as the the labels, the prediction labels that are put on it, and those in this domain, I'm suspecting that most of those prediction labels have to come from radiologists or people doing meticulous work to put those labels on. But is there going to be somebody that says, yeah, these are correct?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that. 2 papers comes to mind because there's one, I think it's Sabaya et al. And I think that one was quantum classification. It wasn't prediction on its own. And say on the top of that chart, this is like a technology slide. You would have like your ADNI databases go in. And then with quantum transfer learning, it's just a portion of it. So say, for instance, if all to approves, say, doing fine tuning with quantum may come first as opposed to like the whole thing. But that's what I see a lot is the hyperparameters fine tuning with a quantum in a specific spot. As far as labeling and those types of things, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, well, I think Ron made a very good point there. I think that's really interesting question. I mean, one thing you could certainly do, you could partner with a hospital and radiologist who have those images. And I think the other thing you need to do is really compare, because I'm sure that there must be someone else who has done this type of study with conventional classical computing, some form of machine learning. And that would be your basis to start with, because if that data set is available, I mean, those images, then you can compare how your quantum algorithm works. And you probably would have to partner with these people because quite often, I think the actual network is copyrighted, or that's basically intellectual property images as well, I guess. So it would really be important to find a partner there, whether it is those people or a hospital, and start with a new data set. But if you want to compare, then you have to obviously try to tap into an existing study with conventional sort of machine learning.
Yeah. And that was kind of like my thought too, is that the images themselves in ADNI or OASIS or Kaggle or wherever, they stay the same, and then you're just performing quantum operations on them. And then you compare your binary tertiary classification against other people. So that was my assumption, is that the actual images I don't need to do much with. They're in a database. People crop them and do all sorts of things.
I think that's just a pilot study. I think once you have demonstrated that this works, the next step would really be to get a much better data set, better images, and partner with the hospital to make this really sort of, I mean, because you want to be one step ahead of the competition.
Yeah,
because first of all, as Ron said, you can't be entirely sure who labeled those images. Maybe the resolution is very poor. I mean, is this the same quality standard? You might want to even get an idea of the stages of Alzheimer's disease, so that you can actually also make predictions regarding early or late Alzheimer's. So I think you would want to refine it. This would just be a pilot, sort of a proof of principle study to show it can be done and there is potential quantum advantage. And then the next stage would really be to get a new set of images and partner with a hospital, basically where there's a good radiology department, and get those radiologists on board, because then that would sort your problem with copyrights, because you would have some sort of agreement with the hospital. Obviously, they own the images somehow. So yeah, that's my thinking. Ron, what do you think?
Well, in that moves the problem down the road a bit, because I've just been I picked up a new book on machine learning, classical machine learning, and all the literature out there in machine learning is kind of academic oriented. It's like everything is about, finding the perfect ML algorithm. Well, that's all well and good until you try to put this into production, line it up with a business, try to figure out whether your model is going to serve the business and that sort of thing. You're going to have the exact same thing here with these image predictions. They're not. You're going to have to adjust your modeling and your techniques to make sure that they fall in line with whoever's going to use it as far as their business model. And and again, going back to this whole business of finding source data that's intelligently labeled. I'm just wondering, I haven't really seen it, are there going to be regulatory agencies that are going to be involved with that labeling, and are they going to collect the data? I mean, you could work with a hospital, but ideally you'd want as much data as possible Is there going to be a government regulatory agency that's going to collect that and put it into a global accessible database and stamp it approved?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Brent, but I thought that it was always medical experts. They'll look at every single image and then they kind of have the final say. And then your AI ML studies or QML studies are just your accuracy is compared to what the experts thought each image was.
That's how it should be, because you have to somehow train the network, whether classical or quantum, and you need accurate labels. So that has to come from experts when we're talking about images like this, or you have to have a test like that you did a biopsy on that person's, an autopsy that you had basically, and you know that the images are from the autopsy, you have a proper pathological diagnosis so that you can, so there has to be some accurate label. I totally agree, and that would have to be an expert, whether it's a radiologist or pathologist, whatever.
Yeah, and
I mean, you might want to, have you actually tried to...
It may be more than one expert. Like when you get into that 10% gray area.
Oh yeah, of course.
You could give that image to 10 radiologists and you could get 6 different answers, right? So there's got to be ways with dealing with that.
Yeah,
you might have to randomize this, but I think that has been done for, I mean, there are lots of other medical data where we have similar problems. And as you mentioned at Rome, you have the problem with bias. You have to have a sort of, your data set has to reflect the whole population. Otherwise, you have a bias if you only have certain groups, and it's quite complicated. But it might be an idea to actually approach the FDA and ask them what you would like to do, and if they could talk you through it. I don't know how willing they are to talk to people and give some guidance.
Well, kind of my framework with that is I'll look at all these papers. There was a 2020 paper, actually, the 2017, that Arteris paper, that I think it was cardiovascular deep learning, that was kind of ahead of its time, because especially in 2020, there was a call to action through, say, Nature papers for the FDA to really start applying or approving a lot more of these. And that seems to be the mechanism of action, because it's just easier for them to read what other people want, as opposed to, like, for lack of better terms, just like speculating over the phone. But I will say this, that the ADNI database so Alzheimer's is typically #1, so MCI, AD, prediction diagnosis, as far as the most studied neuroimaging across the board. And it's all, the ADNI database has often been compared to other types of medical disorders, is that they should have one just like ADNI. So ADNI went through, I think, 3. So ADNI 1, 2, 3, starting off with MRI, and then moving to like PET amyloid, PET tau, and now they're on ADNI #4, and it's an even bigger study too, or more funding. So, but they're also looking at blood work and all that kind of stuff too, because I think they put that in the file. But I'll check into it, and I'll look at because it's the devil's in the details. They have all these kind of technical blurbs, and then I'll look into the specifics and say, like, okay, the exact way that things are done as far as a patient gets to scan, is it labeled by, and it sounds like you're right, Brent, it's like, I think initially you have to start off with a human. You can't have AI unless it's coming from somewhere else to label that. But yes, all the details matter. And then, so Andrew, and if you want to come on, if Andrew or Adon wants to come on, so he says,
yeah,
go ahead.
So yeah, I'm Andrew Burkowski. I'm a pathologist, actually, with interest in machine learning and quantum machine learning in particular. So yeah, I just posted a Medium post on classifying breast cancer with quantum computer. So, I deal with images all the time. Even if you take a small patch of the image, which is 512 by 512, you're gonna have to have thousands of entry points. And currently the best computer you can feed is like 430 qubits. So
yeah,
you will have to compress the image enormously in order to feed it.
And there was
yeah, go ahead.
there was an HPC Wire article that basically says, this whole notion of us needing millions of qubits might not even be the primary goal anymore, with IBM because of dynamic circuits. So the 16,000 by the end of the year and cutting the program to run in pieces and different part of it. The other part of your question sounds like a RAM issue, maybe like 63 qubits. I know for a lot of these, I think, Ron, you were here for that discussion and basically said, once you get over 30 qubits, in theory, the amount of RAM requirement, I think it get up to exabytes, something like that. I could be wrong, but it gets exponentially harder and harder. So that's and I'm not sure how like a 433 Osprey is supposed to work anyway, like with that RAM requirement. But that's what it seems like is, things kind of getting chopped into pieces and run at all these different places. It's some people have not inside knowledge, but like their whole team went up to IBM to witness all this stuff, and it's 127 to 430, like you said, like it's not thousands of qubits at this point. And then the Heron that's coming out this month on the roadmap is supposedly, a lot less error. People might actually prefer it to the 433 for many things. So yes, I think that the RAM thing exists, but it sounds like a lot of these things, and keep in mind, you're not going to have the full quantum effect if you're chopping a 1,000 qubit circuit into pieces, that, a lot of things might be going that way. To kind of mitigate some of these, and I kind of alluded to that before, the quantum simulation with 1 million qubits of the brain, where there's like 100 billion neurons and 100 billion glia, and then you have interactions in between all that stuff. So yeah, it's like the shortcuts, right? But that was my takeaway from last quarter, is dynamic circuits might have a more immediate impact than what many people thought.
Yeah, I guess, there are some solutions. People, chop the images into very tiny patches and then reassemble them. So yeah, you can do it, but then you lose some of the spatial relationship between the pixels.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I would say, go ahead.
Yeah, but
Go ahead. Yeah.
Did you have something, Brent?
Yeah, the MinStack, there's one sort of favorite tool, let's call it toy of in machine learning. It's the MINST dataset, which basically is handwritings of people, letters. And there are quite a few machine learning models, but some of them really compress that information because the image is still quite big and you can make it really, really small. You can still then distinguish the individual letters, and this is handwriting. So I think it's a case of what type of compression you use, because the information about Alzheimer's might still be somewhere in that highly compressed image. So it's a question of data pre-processing and the right form of state preparation for the quantum network. And then, as you said, the convolutional architecture, which in principle is a form of data compression.
Yeah, and it could also be the perfect storm too, because the requirements right now, especially medical and then, imaging, is multimodal and especially XAI, so explainable AI. So I think Ron touched on that before, but basically starting off with the neurologist needs and then working backwards to the coder, and then whatever information comes out, it's interpretable, or more interpretable with quantum DL or quantum CNN.
Yeah, this digits, the data set MNIST, actually the digits are 28 by 28 pixels. So these are tiny images to start with. And then people compress them to about, 2 by 2 or 3 by 3.
Yeah.
So, but like if you talk about pathology images, there are millions of pixels. They're not even thousands. There are millions of pixels. Whole slide image would be something we were talking about, gigabytes. So that's.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of this is like the whole Tesla argument, because people say, okay, that's what imaging is going to be great at. If you're in Tesla cars, it's not good. Like it's okay, but when you drive up on cars, you can't see the future, or you can't see other cars too. So this may be a combination of quantum sensing, quantum computing. But I mean, as far as some of these limitations, from what I heard from before, is that quantum is would be the thing for imaging.
I think that the quantum, to me, the biggest advantage would be, feature manipulation. So you can put these features in higher dimensions very easily because of the superposition. That would be the biggest advantage.
Okay.
I was going to say that if you have an 8-bit quantum register, that I've seen imaging algorithms that allow you to encode an 8x8 single bit image into that 8-bit quantum register, where that would take you 256 bits on a classical machine, right? So there, part of that is the quantum advantage of the register being totally in superposition.
Yeah, and so Ron's been around for this discussion. So there's the Los Alamos National Laboratory paper. It says the opportunities and the hard things to do in quantum machine learning. They say supervised learning, pick problems that focus on that, hidden parameter extraction, and then also there's going to be a range. So right now we have exponential data in machine learning, but in classical data, but we don't have it in quantum. So once you start to piece these things together, say if we can detect getting quantum data, to quantum memory, / sensing to computing, that your exponential goes even higher. But yeah, that's kind of what I've seen. That's the first time I heard with that as far as the features manipulation because of superpositioning. And then, kind of like the next things is some of the other things that just get mentioned in all these articles.
Yeah. Another thing that we were talking about is we're in quantum machine learning. We're still in the baby steps of quantum convolutional neural networks. Well, convolutional neural networks in classical machine learning gets criticized for losing pixels, because as you go through your layers of your neural network, you're reducing the number of pixels. It's a data reduction. Convolution is a data, or it doesn't have to be, but most cases it's a data reduction, or they'll have pooling layers and that sort of thing. I'm not too worried about that from the standpoint is I don't care if you throw away pixels, as long as you don't throw away features. So if you can engineer those things to do that. But interestingly enough, because of this pressure or this criticism of convolutional neural networks, there's been a spilling over of transformers into image processing recently, where they are kind of sidestepping some of those early stages and tokenizing pieces of the image and then using transformers to do things. And people are starting to get better results with that.
Yeah.
So right now we're in the infancy of QCNN, but by the time they get that figured out, they probably need to move on to, there might be better things in classical.
Yeah.
They need to leverage in.
And I think why QCNN has been mentioned the most for quantum and imaging is just because it's tolerant to error as opposed to many other methods. I think so it's the Roche and QCware paper. They did pneumonia and like a retina test, very basic. And I think they used a QNN, so not convolutional. So it'll be interesting because in all these discussions, it's just like, if it fast forward 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and the quantum computer's there, then you can do all sorts of things. Because I'll come across papers that say like, we choose, a different method in quantum because the other ones just are more susceptible to noise. And I guess kind of what people have been focusing on is narrow just because it's the only thing that can run.
Yeah, I agree with that. One last comment. I had one of your slides had a note about NVIDIA GPU. I found it pretty interesting in that it's a fairly old card, old by GPU standards. It's like was released in 17 or 17
Was
or
it?
19
I
or
think it was
something.
part of the like the specific research paper, not like what's coming up.
Yeah, no,
Like at the
it's like
top of the slide.
it was at the top of the slide. I was talking about results they got, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, that is like a couple of generations ago.
Well, it can prove their point too. Like if you're running on an older, like 2-year-old model, because I think in that specific case it was like less than 10 minutes. I've seen, and it sounded like more of the modern or up-to-date GPUs, depending on the task, it could still take 10 hours. You know, even if it's something pretty new.
Yeah, but for example, those particular cards that were listed are like $200 now.
Oh yeah.
And you can get, so you could, if you had the right machine that you could, with enough, you know, full bandwidth PCI slots, you could ramp that up pretty quick. But
Well,
I
they could,
wouldn't even waste the time, because
right.
the latest technology that's out there from NVIDIA that you can buy on the street is, you know, it's in the $1,500 area, and it's crazy more capabilities than that GTX 1050. So
Yeah.
if that's part of the barrier to getting started, again, the budget for, if you wanted to have in-house hardware, the budget for that may not be as bad as people think, and it may start to become more competitive with cloud services. So
Uh-huh.
just something.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Okay, any other last questions or comments, Andrew or Don?
No more question. Thank you so much. Fascinating talk.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, this has been episode 65 and January 12th, 2023. Thanks everybody for coming on, and have a good rest of your week. Take care.